Hello and welcome back to the Ground Up Advanced Flight Tutorials. Thank you very much for joining me in this episode, and before I continue with this episode, if you have not seen the last one, this episode is going to make no sense whatsoever, so you do need to go and see the last episode because it's all about crosswinds, and that episode, that 30 minutes, covers all the theory about crosswinds, and in this episode we're going to be putting as much of that into actual practice as possible. So make sure you go check out episode 9 before you watch this video. With that being said, if you haven't seen episodes 3, 4, 5 and 7, I also recommend you go and watch all of those episodes because we're going to be using everything we learnt in those episodes to fly today. On top of that, obviously episode 1 is going to be very important as well. In fact, all of them are going to be important, but more so episodes 3, 4, 5 and 7. 3, 4 and 5 most definitely. 7 maybe not as much, but definitely 3, 4 and 5, and the last episode, episode 9 I believe it was. Yeah, it was episode 9, and if it wasn't, then I mean the last episode, whatever that one was. I'm just trying to remember if it was episode 9. Yes, I'm fairly certain it was. But anyway, before I continue, I do want to say that I really appreciate you guys watching these videos, and if you are enjoying them, please remember to like the videos, comment on the videos, subscribe to the channel, share the videos, whether you're watching this on Twitch, whether you're watching this on YouTube. Thumbs up, comments, sharing, follow me, whatever it is. You can find me on Twitter as well at you'll find the actual Twitter link in the description box, but it's at ECGadgetLP. That's at ECGadgetLP. And if you can afford to, and you really do enjoy these videos, please do consider throwing a few dollars, few pounds, few euros, whatever it is, my way, please, on Patreon. Link to that is in the description box below. I would massively appreciate your support. It'll allow me to create a living out of this, and of course make better and more complete videos, more well produced videos, better edited videos, better quality microphone, better quality speaking, a more powerful computer, all those things that will allow me to create better content for you guys to all enjoy. So if you do really like these videos, or you do want to support me in that way, please do go check out my Patreon scheme and support me through there. And of course, as a reward, everyone gets access to my Discord server as well, where you start finding out a whole bunch of stuff about the stuff that I do, why I do it, what I'm doing, what I'm planning next, and you guys can influence the content that I create in that way. Now that is all out the way, quick recap over the last lesson. We went over crosswinds and understanding all the theory about crosswinds. We drew a number of triangles. If you were watching that lesson, we drew a number of triangles that were showing, the first triangle we drew was trying to work out where an aircraft would drift to if we were flying in a certain direction. Then we worked out from that what a heading correction would be to fly the track that we wanted to fly. The track is the direction you want to fly in. The heading obviously is the heading of the aircraft. A heading and track may not be the same in a wind because again, to quickly explain, if a wind is blowing in one direction, let's say you're doing 100 knots in this direction due west, and a wind is blowing from 180 at 10 knots in 100 nautical miles, you're actually going to be 10 miles off course from where you want to be. You're going to be 10 miles further towards the south, further towards the north than you would have expected yourself to be had there been no wind. So to compensate for that, you have to work out the heading correction. To do that, you can use the trigonometry, you can use tan, and we worked it out. 10 over 100 is 0.1, and then from there we do tan, or the arctan of 0.1, which is 5.8 degrees. Was it 5.8 degrees? Was it 5.4 degrees? 5.4 degrees, I think. So then you have to turn 5.4 degrees into the wind. Therefore, in this case, if we were flying 270, we would have to fly a heading of 264 point, what was it, 264.4, I think it was 264.4 what we worked out last time, but approximately 265 degrees is where you would have to turn to get the aircraft flying in the direction you wanted it to fly. So that's what you would have to do. with that, we then moved on to working out the actual components of a wind, because what if a wind, you know, it's very rare that a wind blows directly crosswind. In this case, as you may know, I'll bring this back up here. Hopefully this time we can hear it. No, we can't. Is it on there? I don't know. It's on one of these. I'm almost certain of it. But anyway, East Midlands Airport Information Alpha. Again, we went over what that was in very, very simple terms, but this is what we wanted. Wind 212 at 16. So that is blowing from sort of a southwest direction. It's blowing that way, and we worked out what the headwind and the crosswind components were of that wind, and then we talked about how that's going to affect the way the aircraft flies. For example, with the headwind, it means that we're actually, our ground speed is going to be, once we're in the air, is going to be 8 knots. It's going to be 8 knots slower than we thought. It was actually going to be, I think it was 8.4 knots, 8.5 knots, yeah, slower than what we're actually doing, what is actually indicated on the airspeed. And our crosswind leg, our crosswind speed is going to be 13.5 knots, and that meant that we are going to have to do a heading correction. So we're going to actually work out the heading correction that we're going to need today, and we're going to then try and fly this aircraft. We're going to be making a lot of heading corrections over here to try and keep the aircraft flying straight. But before we do that, we need to go over a little bit more theory that we need to know about taking an aircraft off and landing an aircraft. Then we'll do a couple of calculations and we will take off. So the first thing we need to do is we need to understand, how do we take an aircraft off in a crosswind? Because if we were to accelerate right now, you know, we're going to put our throttles up right now, the aircraft is going to get pushed over 13, don't forget the whole idea of 13.5 knots. It's going to be pushed over in that direction. We're going to end up off the runway very, very quickly. And remember when we talked, let me get this straight up again. Remember when we talked about the 100 knots and the 10 knots? Well, imagine if it was a lot slower. Let's say we were only doing 50 knots, for example. So if we say we're doing 50 knots, we now do 10 divided by 50, which is very different. That is now 0.2. Now tan, or the arctan of 0.2 is 11 degrees. So that means that we need an even bigger heading correction, because we're getting pushed off course a lot faster here. So you can imagine that the slower you go in the same sort of crosswind, the slower you go, the more off course you're going to be pushed over the course of 1 hour. So if you imagine you're going to be, let's see, that's probably not the best way to actually say it, because you're still going to be pushed 10 miles off course if you're doing whatever it is, but for the same distance that you travel, you're going to be pushed more off course. That's the better way to say it. So if you're doing 100 knots, in 1 hour, you're going to do 100 knots and you're going to be pushed off course 10 miles. So 100 miles forward, 10 miles, in this case, to the north. If you're doing 50 knots, obviously you can't do that, but if you're doing 50 knots, let's say it was possible, you're doing 50 knots, it's going to take you 2 hours to do the same distance. So in the 2 hours, you're going to be pushed 10 miles off course and then another 10 miles off course. So you're going to be pushed 20 miles off course as opposed to 10. That's what I was trying to get at. So the slower you go, the more off course you get pushed for the same distance. That's right, not the same amount of time, for the same distance. Anyway, with that all being said, let's go over the theory of taking an aircraft off in a crosswind, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to crash the aircraft, we don't want to go off the runway, we don't want to end up going off that side of the runway, we don't want to end up going off that side of the runway, and we don't want the aircraft to end up skipping, or we don't want the aircraft to want to flip, and that's also possible. So what's the first thing we need to know about taking off? Well, it's the same aspect of taxiing. Taxiing and takeoff is going to have the same sort of basis. So the basis is we use these ailerons here. You can see them moving. Let's bring the flaps down. You can see them moving right there. We're going to use this to keep ourselves going on course. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to start by deflecting our ailerons into the wind. So what does that mean? That means the wind is coming from this direction. So we're going to turn into the wind, which means your yoke, your joystick, whatever you're using is going to go this way, fully. So we're going to turn it fully into the wind, and you can see there is full aileron deflection right there. That's full aileron deflection. Let's go outside, and you can see the deflection right there, ready to go. As a matter of fact, what we're also going to do is we're going to actually turn the rudder that way as well. So that's that. And the reason I've done this right now is because I want to take a screenshot right here for both episodes, since I'm doing the episodes together, and you can see that I am actually doing something very different here. So we're going to do that. There we go. Right, back inside the aircraft we go. So you can see, first of all, our ailerons are fully deflected. Why are we doing this? Why have we started deflecting this into the wind? Well, what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep this wing down. As we know, if we turn the yoke this way, it pushes one wing down. If we turn the yoke the other way, it pushes the other wing down. We want to keep this wing down because this wing is going to want to lift up faster than the other wing because of the direction of the wind. So that's something we have to take into account. We have to make sure that we are fully deflected on the ailerons before we start our takeoff roll. Next up, we need to make sure that we're ready to use the rudder, because the aircraft, especially in this condition with the winds that I've set up and a light aircraft like this, the rudder is going to be paramount on keeping this aircraft on the center line of the runway, because with the ailerons pushed in this form, the aircraft is also going to want to turn towards the left. So it's going to want to do that anyway. It's going to want to turn into the wind. That's what it's going to want to do. So what we need to do is we need to counter and do a counter rudder on this. So if we go outside again, this is going to turn us into the wind. The ailerons are going to turn us into the wind. The aircraft in itself is going to want to turn into the wind. So the way we counter that is we're going to rudder in the opposite direction. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to use the right rudder in the opposite direction to take us off. Fantastic. Okay, now what's going to happen is that as we start speeding up down the runway, I'm actually going to switch on all our lights. Oh, interior lights still don't work. As we start to accelerate and speed up down the runway, the ailerons are going to have more airflow over them and they're going to become more effective. As they become more effective, the aircraft is going to want to turn more and more and more. So what we have to do is we have to, as we start speeding up, bring the ailerons down nice and gently. That's what we're going to have to do. Obviously, we're also going to have to use the rudder to keep this on the center line. So we're going to be using a lot of that rudder, that right rudder. As the ailerons come down, we're going to start bringing that rudder in as well. We're going to start bringing the ailerons in and trying to keep ourselves on the center line of the runway as best as possible. This is not going to be easy, especially in the conditions that I have set up here, because this is going to be pretty rough. That's going to help keep our wings level whilst we're on the ground. And what's going to happen is that if we do not deflect these enough, like I said, the aircraft is going to try and lift the wing. The wind is going to try, from this direction, is going to try and lift this wing first. If we're not pushing down far enough, that wing is going to lift up. That means, in turn, if we go behind again, this gear is going to lift up. This wing is going to pitch down closer to the ground. The worst thing we could do, the least damage we could do is damage this nose gear by pushing all the weight onto it. The worst thing we could do is have so little deflection that this wing touches the ground, so we end up with a wing strike. That's going to end up in disaster. So we want to make sure that we do not do that. So that's all we need to try and work out. What we're also going to do is when we take off, we're going to try and make sure that obviously the nose gear comes up first, as you always do, because you're going to pull up, the nose gear is going to come up. But as opposed to these two lifting off at the same time, we're going to try and get this gear up slightly before we get this gear up. That's what we're going to try and do. So this is called the upwind gear in this case, because the wind's coming from that direction. If it was coming from that direction, this would be the upwind gear. So we're going to get the nose gear up first, then the downwind gear, then the upwind gear. That's what we're going to try and do. So that's going to be our takeoff order. Back in the aircraft, once we have taken off, we are going to have to crab the aircraft. Remember, I spoke about crabbing in the last episode. We're going to crab the aircraft to maintain the center line of the runway as best as we possibly can. Now, odds are this is not going to go all too well, but we can do a quick calculation right now to work it out. What are we going to have to do? If we're trying to get a 90 knot takeoff, we can quickly do 90 divided by 13.5 divided by 90 is going, so 90 is going to be our takeoff or our climb speed, which is going to be 0.15. So if we do 0.15 and we do the octane of 0.15, we're going to get 8.5 degrees. So we've got 8.5 degrees that we need to deal with. That's fine. So we're going to try and turn the nose of the aircraft to a heading of 261 or thereabouts. We're going to have to start by probably going further than 260, and then as we climb up to our climb speed, then we will be able to have it holding at about 261, 262 to maintain the center line of the runway. That's going to be the way we're crabbing, which means the aircraft is going to be facing in that direction but flying a heading of 270. 262 is the heading, the track is 270. That's what we're going to do. Let's remember that about 8.5 degrees, we'll say. So we'll say 8.5 degrees is what we're looking for. 261, 262. That's our heading. We're also going to do another calculation very, very quickly. We've got the other crosswind. Because we're going to be doing a circuit, we're going to be turning into the wind, which means the crosswind is going to change. What's it going to change to? Well, if we're going to do a left-hand circuit, that means the wind's going to be blowing from, as we turn to a heading of 180, the wind is going to be blowing from 270, which means it's going to be pushing us in this direction. So we are going to have to work out that one, which we did before. It was 8.5 or 8.4, wasn't it? So if we do 8.4 divided by, let's say we're now going to, let's say 90, we'll go for 90 and then we'll compensate when we get to 100. So we do that and then we do the octane of that. That's going to give us about 5.5 degrees. So we've got 5.5 degrees again is going to be our correction. So now we're going to go from an almost 10 degree correction to about 5 degree correction. So we're going to go from 26, or in this case it's going to be 180. To maintain a track of 180, we're going to have to fly 175. Then when we go on our downwind leg, we're probably going to be doing 100 knots at that point. So we're actually going to have our 13.5 divided by 100 this time, and we're going to do the octane of that, and that's going to be about 7.5 degrees. So really 8 degrees all the way through is what we can manage. So we're going to have to do an 8 degree. When we're heading on 090, we're going to be pushed in that direction. So we're going to have to add 8 degrees to this one. So we're going to add 8 degrees to it. Again, we have to always turn in to the wind. So the crosswind, if it's blowing that way, we have to turn into the wind, and we're going to have a tailwind. We're also going to have a tailwind. Let's not forget about that. So we're going to turn to a heading again of about 7 to 8 degrees. So we're going to add 8, so we're going to go, let's say 098. So we're going to take off and fly 262, then we're going to turn and fly heading of 175, then we're going to do 098 or 097, then we're going to be facing 0. At 0 we're still going to be pushed over, so we're actually going to be turning again into the wind, which means we're going to have a track of 0, we're going to fly, so a 360 track is going to mean we have to fly approximately 355. So we're going to fly 355, then we're going to turn in and we're going to land the aircraft. Now what we need to do is we need to do a little bit of theory before landing the aircraft. I can't believe this is already 20 minutes in, but we're going to have to manage this anyway. So we're going to do a crosswind landing theory. So what's the theory about landing? I'm actually considering doing this in 3 episodes now. The landing theory that we need to do is we're going to pick up 2 ways of landing. We've got the crab method, which I've already explained how the crab works. So we're going to talk about how to land with a crab, and we're going to have a WingLo method. So what is the crab method? The crab method means we fly the heading like we were flying. So like I said, we would head on a heading of 262. So a 262 heading is what we're going to fly, which means that we're going to be not pointing in the direction of the runway. However, the aircraft is going to be flying in the direction of the runway, the track of 270. So we need to be concerned about this. We're going to approach the runway crabbed. So we're going to approach the runway sideways. Now you often see big jetliners doing this, but light aircraft don't often do this because it is a little bit difficult. What you have to do, and I do this on other simulators in jetliners, I've never actually done this in a light aircraft. So what you want to do is you want to prevent your drifting of left and right by using that crab method, and then you're all okay, and you can use the rudder very slightly to maintain that, or your ailerons, just adjusting the angle very slightly. Now, when you flare your aircraft, you're still crabbing, which means as we go past this threshold when we're landing, we are still going to be sideways. Our aircraft is still going to be sideways. And then just before we touch down, on our touchdown point, as best as we can, we're going to kick the rudder to the right. So we're going to kick the rudder to the right, turning the nose of the aircraft hard right. And as the nose of the aircraft goes hard right, we're going to align with the runway. So once we align with the runway, we need to make sure that the aircraft lands straight, and again we bring the ailerons in like this. Very slowly, we've got to gently bring those ailerons in to make sure that once we've aligned with the runway and touched down, the aircraft doesn't skid off in that direction. So that's what we're going to have to worry about. That's the crab method. Now, why is it not good on light aircraft? What's the problem that it's not why is it not used on light aircraft? It's very easy to maintain your center line, but what we're doing is when we do hard right on the rudder, it's called kicking out. It's like drifting a car. When you're turning and then you suddenly in a car you break traction on the rear by doing a sudden acceleration. If you've got a rear wheel drive car, you slam on the accelerator, you break the traction, get the back to slide out. I talked about this when we were talking about turning an aircraft and spinning out by not using the rudder. It's the same sort of thing, except for this, we're using the rudder not to spin out, we're using the rudder to straighten up. So it's the exact same sort of setup. Now, if you do it wrong, you're going to fly left, right, you're not going to land correctly, you're going to have issues landing the aircraft. So it takes a lot of practice and you need to judge it very, very quickly. Why is it easier though in, for example, a jet than it is in this? Now, I fly a lot of 737s, or I used to. It's been a long time since I've done that, but I used to fly a lot of 737s. When you land a 737 or 747 or an Airbus A320, whatever you want to land, and you land with the crab technique and then you're turning with the rudder, you have a very heavy aircraft turning around. So you've got momentum. You have momentum, you've got inertia. Inertia is very, very important on an aircraft. So when the aircraft touches down, if it's not on the center line of the runway or straight with the runway, because it's so heavy, it's going to continue turning as the rest of the wheels touch down. And then down the runway, you're just going to continue, you're going to continue in a straight line very, very easily because it's so heavy. Your tiny aircraft, in this case this Piper, when it touches down, it's so light. The moment it touches down, it's going to be flung off in the direction it's touched down in. It's not going to have the inertia to continue turning the aircraft. It's down, it's now going to try and do whatever it's supposed to do when it's down, not continuing to rotate. So if you've kicked it out wrong and you've touched down and you haven't kicked it out enough, the aircraft is going to ping off in that direction. That's what it's going to want to do. If you've overcorrected, it's going to ping off in that direction. And then you have to take into account the fact that when you land, you have to account for that wind, which is going to try and turn it, blow it off course in that direction. Then the ailerons are going to try and turn it in that direction. So all this has to be taken into account. So what do light aircraft do instead? Very, very simple. We use what's called a WingLo method, and that's the method that I'll be trying in, well, I guess it's now going to be the next video because this has already been quite a long video. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and get a nice smooth landing by keeping one wing down. So what does that mean? So what we're going to do is when we come into land, we're going to start by having ourselves lined up on the crab. We're going to give ourselves a bit of an extended final, and we're going to make sure that we're lined up with the crab method first. So at least we're lined up with the runway, and we can see that we're lined up with the runway. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use the rudder early. So not when we're flaring, we're going to use the rudder whilst we are still flying the aircraft, and we're going to turn so that the aircraft is facing the center line of the runway. Now you're probably thinking, hang on a minute, if we do that we're going to get blown off course. You just explained you get blown off course. This is true. How do we compensate for being blown off course? Well, we turn the aircraft in a special way. What we do is with the rudder held in one direction, similar to how we take off, we have the ailerons held in the opposite direction. So the ailerons are pushing left, the rudder is pushing right. What this is going to do is this is going to drop that wing. So that wing is going to be pushed closer to the ground than that wing. And that is going to cause a turning force on the aircraft. That turning force is going to compensate for the rudder and for the rudder and the wind pushing us to the opposite side. So the rudder is going to keep us straight. The ailerons are going to keep us, are going to essentially tilt the aircraft. It's going to be, the aircraft's going to look tilted, but it's going to keep us flying straight. That whole combination in the wind. So that's called the WingLo method. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we are always on the runway center line. We have to make sure that our axis, if imagine the extended center line, we need to make sure it's always aligned with the runway. So from final to touchdown, we're going to be aligned with that runway. Now it takes a little bit of practice, of course, because what you're doing here is, again, you're not exactly crabbing the aircraft, but what you're doing is you're sort of slipping the aircraft. In a way, you're slipping the aircraft by having the rudder one way and the ailerons another way. That's sort of slipping an aircraft. Gliders do it to slow down. They do it very, very severely. And you can do it in light aircraft. It's very, very common to do it on light aircraft. So what you want to do is once you've got that all lined up, so like I said, you get the nose aligned, then you stop your drift with the ailerons, and then you just make sure you keep yourself aligned right at the end. Now we need to do the final part, which is the flare and the touchdown. It's going to be a little bit different because your flight controls are crossed. What you've done is you've crossed your flight controls, which means, like I said, ailerons one way, rudder the other way. So what we're going to do is, because they're crossed, your controls are not as effective anymore. So you're going to have to add more rudder in to keep that nose lined up with the runway as you slow down, and you're going to have to add more aileron so that you don't go off the center line. So the closer you get to the end, you're going to have to add more and more aileron, more and more rudder, almost like you're taking off. And then you have to try and keep that wing low the whole time. That upwind wing, that's this wing here, you want to make sure it always is pushing down towards the ground. Not so much though that you're going to hit, because otherwise what will happen is that gear will touch down first, then this gear, then the nose, and you might end up breaking a gear. So you need to make sure that that is compensated for. So you keep it down, which means the landing order is the opposite of the takeoff order. Takeoff order was what? Nose, downwind leg, downwind gear, upwind gear. Landing, you want to have this one touch down first, then you're going to have that one touch down, then you're going to have the nose touch down. Very, very simple. So you want to make sure the upwind touches down just before the downwind, which is just before the nose. And you have to make sure the best way to do this is landing one wheel at a time. Just try and land one wheel at a time. And also remember, as soon as the nose touches down, you're going to have to start turning the rudder back. You don't want to be holding that rudder all the way, because you're going to start turning, well, that way. You're going to start turning that way, so you need to be careful of that. And then again, as you slow the aircraft down, use the rudder to keep on the center line and more and more and more towards the left, in this case for slowing the aircraft down, exactly as you did on takeoff, but opposite. So on takeoff you started fully deflected and then you eased up, eased up, eased up. On landing you're going to start eased up and then fully deflect as you start landing your aircraft. So that's going to be quite interesting. Anyway, I think that brings me to the end of this second theory episode. I'm sorry that it is another theory episode, but I did have to make sure that you understand everything that we're about to do, because this is starting to get a little bit more complicated. So thank you very much for watching. Please remember to hit the like button if you like the video. Subscribe to the channel for more videos on the ground up advanced flight tutorials. Leave a comment in the comments box below letting me know what you think. My throat is getting really sore after all this talking. Hopefully I can get through the next video, or I'm going to have to wait and record it on another day. But hopefully I can get through that next video. And do support me on Patreon. Link to that is in the description box below. I would massively appreciate your support. It would help me out a huge amount, and also it'll give you access to my Discord server where you guys can talk in a nice growing community and ask me all sorts of questions, and it'll just help me create better videos as well on YouTube and on Twitch. I might even start streaming when I get to a certain stage. Thank you very much for watching once again, and I will see you guys next time in the ground up advanced flight tutorials, where this time I promise we will get into the air.